Founded in 1867, the National Grange now stands as the nation's oldest rural advocacy organization. As a grassroots and family-centered organization, the National Grange works diligently to provide a voice for rural America through its 200,000 members in more than 2,300 local chapters across the country. Standing 11 stories tall, the National Grange building stands at 1616 H Street, next to the home of Stephen Decatur and overlooking the White House. It stands as the fruit of struggle of our Grange forefathers, who recognized the need for a permanent presence in the capital, but faced many trials on the road to achieving such. Today we will retrace their footsteps and tell the story of how that presence came to be. Join us as we celebrate the National Grange Building, 50 years of service. Throughout the second half of the 19th century, the National Grange's presence in Washington, D.C. came in the form of the homes of national secretaries, Oliver Hudson Kelley, John Thompson, and John Trimble. As Grangers in our nation's capital, they themselves were the Grange's presence and voice. As the 19th century began to come to a close, more and more Grangers began to recognize the need for a more permanent voice in Washington to solidify our presence there. In 1883, 16 years into our organization's history, a number of Grangers began advocating for such a headquarters at conventions. 35 years later, the dream finally became a reality. In 1918, the National Grange decided to send a permanent representative to the nation's capital, citing the emergencies now confronting our country, and especially our agricultural industry. Chosen to represent the organization in this headquarters was Thomas Atkinson, former National Overseer and first Legislative Director for the National Grange. He worked out of a location at 303 7th Street, now regarded as the first official headquarters of the National Grange. $10,000 was appropriated for the maintenance of that headquarters. As the National Grange forged ahead into the early 20th century, the organization was still growing at an unprecedented rate, and this presented several problems for the location on 7th Street, mainly that it was inadequate for the organization's needs. 2 years later, the 1920 convention of the National Grange in Grand Rapids, Michigan, established the Washington Building Fund. Until such a fund could be used to purchase or construct our own building, the National Grange continued to find space elsewhere. Moving on from the 7th Street location, the National Grange took occupancy of the second floor of a building owned by the National Bank of Washington in 1921. It was located at the corner of C Street, Louisiana Avenue, and 7th Street, at the intersection of these streets with Pennsylvania Avenue, facing the circle occupied by the Grand Army of the Republic Memorial Monument. Within 15 years, however, that space had also become too small to accommodate the growth of the National Grange, and so in 1936 the order moved into what would be its last rented space at 1343 H Street Northwest. In 1943, after several years of searching, the Executive Committee finally found a building to purchase. This was the first headquarters owned by the National Grange. Located at 744 Jackson Place Northwest, the new Grange home stood 8 stories tall and faced the White House from across Lafayette Square. The National Grange made extensive renovations on the building and laid out the offices to conveniently suit the needs of the organization. At the time, the National Grange occupied the entire 6th floor, as well as the storage and working spaces of the basement, and rented out the rest of the building. Several other farm and agricultural organizations rented space in the building for their own national headquarters. Having the building gave the National Grange added credibility, and it was right where National Master Albert Goss and others felt it belonged. Funding of the new headquarters came through various avenues. With the help of the building fund set up in 1920, the National Grange was able to put down a substantial down payment. In 1942, the building fund totaled over $130,000. Funds raised through the yearly transfers of $5,000 from the National Grange General Fund and the fundraising from the Diamond Jubilee Anniversary. Fundraising activities included Grange lunches, suppers, penny sales, and paid lecture series. Some 7,000 subordinate and Pomona Granges helped in the campaign. To pay for the building, the Grange used monies from the general funds, and it secured a loan from the National Grange Mutual Liability Company of Keene, New Hampshire. Although the location of the new headquarters on prime real estate was good for the order in some ways, it also made the building the envy of certain agencies within the federal government that had other plans for that block. After 2 unsuccessful reclamation attempts, the National Grange building again came under attack in the summer of 1956. News of the federal government's 3rd attempt to take the Grange building first came to light following a secret executive meeting of the Senate House Public Works Committee in 1956. During this meeting, representatives of the General Services Administration requested and obtained authorization for a new federal office building. Under a law known as the Public Buildings Purchase Contract Act of 1954, the GSA acted on their perceived power to condemn and seize any private property needed for the conclusion of a project. On January 4, 1957, the GSA officially filed condemnation proceedings against the Grange building. Within a few weeks, the GSA took even more immediate action, and on January 25th, it took possession of the title of the Grange building by way of the Justice Department. The National Grange filed answer to the condemnation suit and an objection to the declaration of taking on February 18, 1957. When requesting approval for the GSA project, they claimed the proposed new building would house the Veterans Administration. Having stated later that they had no definite plans for using the property, that February the GSA had focused on using the property as a lawn or a parking lot. Numerous articles from the time period show the bitter struggle that the National Grange had to undergo during that time. In the National Grange Monthly from November 1957, National Grange Public Relations Director Jack Jackson wrote an article discussing the fight between the National Grange and the federal government. In it, he wrote,
"The federal government now owns your headquarters building. Attorneys for the Department of Justice said there is a possibility that crews and cranes might move in overnight to start knocking the building down when a final court decree and final value determination is reached, unless officers of the Grange enter into a definitive determination as to rental value and date when the building may be vacated. The National Master and Executive Committee have successfully avoided paying rent or making other commitments to indicate that they are ready to concede the loss of this rural family headquarters."
Needless to say, finding out that the National Grange would have to pay rent on a building they bought and paid for themselves angered members across the nation. With the help of several U.S. congressmen and senators, the Grange sought restoration of their national headquarters. In a show of support from Congress, over 100 bills were sponsored in support of the National Grange. Congress took action by limiting appropriations for the independent offices in 1958, effectively cutting off any support for the GSA to acquire the property. In essence, Congress supported the federal office building project, but not at the expense of the Grange. Still, Grangers all over the country continued to write to the National Grange and to their congressmen expressing great concern for the situation. These legislators began contacting the National Grange as well, and to answer the great volume of mail that was being received by the Grange in Washington, D.C., National Master Herschel Newsom had no choice but to send a letter to members. On March 11, 1957, he wrote a general letter to all Grange masters, stating in part,
Members of Congress have been calling in increasing numbers for some 5 or 6 weeks to tell us of the letters they are receiving from home in regard to the government's taking of the National Grange property. We recognize that the federal government can probably succeed in taking any property anywhere in the nation that it may decide to take. We are earnestly hopeful, however, that we can succeed in proving that it didn't yet have the authority to take this property.
On July 24, 1958, the National Grange and the federal government finally reached an agreement. The GSA and the National Grange would switch land sites, and a new Grange headquarters would be built. Master Newsom professed his belief that the struggle for the property would only continue into the future. The federal government gave the property to the National Grange on August 11, 1958, as well as an additional $360,000 in compensation. According to the agreement, the National Grange would be able to maintain the Jackson Place location until construction of a new National Grange headquarters was complete. The property given to the National Grange is located on the opposite side of the Decatur House as the Jackson Place building stood. The new headquarters had a planned completion of early 1960. Chosen as the architect by the building committee was Mr. Jerome O'Connor, and they chose the Joseph C. Behan Construction Company to construct the new building on H Street. Along with its 11 stories, it would have 2 basement floors and total 49,000 square feet of gross floor space. The groundbreaking ceremony was on January 8, 1959. Master Herschel Newsom and members of the building committee turned the first spade of earth. National officers and representatives of 17 state granges were present for the ceremony, and by April work had begun on what was supposed to become a narrow brick structure 110 feet tall in the 1600 block of H Street Northwest. While holding to the plan otherwise, the federal government decided that all buildings in the area would have to be made of limestone, and so the building plan was changed appropriately. Later, when that program was scrapped after the completion of the new National Grange headquarters, the new building became the only building in the area made of limestone and retains that distinction today. One year later, work on the building had been completed, and by order of the federal government, the National Grange moved into their new headquarters that April. At that time, 4 floors of the building had already been rented out. On June 29, 1960, with President Dwight D. Eisenhower on hand to commemorate the achievement, the building was officially dedicated. 35 tour guides escorted about 1,500 people on special tours through the building on dedication days, June 28th and 29th. Around 200 buses were chartered to transport Grange members to Washington, D.C. for the dedication ceremony. National Master Newsom called the construction of the new headquarters the attainment of a dream first envisioned by the founders of the organization over 93 years ago. Invocation was given by Franklin C. Nixon, master of the New Jersey State Grange and chaplain of the National Grange. Secretary of Agriculture, Ezra Taft Benson, pronounced the benediction. In the end, construction of the new building totaled about $1.2 million. The National Grange borrowed $800,000 at an interest rate of 5.5%. At the time, it was figured that if each member contributed $1.30, they could retire the debt, and they hoped to have this done by the end of 1961. To help with fundraising, the National Grange prepared a 25-minute, 16mm color and sound movie of the dedication of the new building by President Eisenhower. It was available for Grange meetings on loan from the National Office. For Granges that couldn't arrange for a 16mm projector with sound, they had a set of 2-inch by 2-inch slides that told approximately the same story as the movie. Master Herschel Newsom and Brother Seward Foote, his special assistant, worked together to prepare a poster for subordinate Granges to further educate Grange members of the debt. Copies of it were sent to Pomona masters along with brochures. In 1960, each subordinate and juvenile Grange, along with the Pomona Granges in some cases, received a quota of these. The quota represented the Grange's share of the state target. On March 25, 1977, after finally raising the necessary funds, the National Grange held a mortgage-burning ceremony to celebrate the building's new debt-free status. More than 200 Grangers were present. Under the financial leadership of National Master John Scott, the Grange was able to maintain a strict budget without lowering the level of Grange services. He also recognized the importance of the countless fundraising projects that had been conducted by women. The National Grange Bicentennial Year Cookbook brought in $300,000 and provided the final boost needed to pay off the mortgage. As a result, Grange cookbooks are still at the forefront of Grange fundraising and are a staple of the organization's tradition. Because of its prime location, the building rarely has vacant office space. Today, approximately 45% of the organization's operating budget comes from the building's tenants. In addition, the building provides the organization with an important presence in Washington, D.C., serving as a home to state Grange legislative departments visiting the Capitol, as well as having provided the backdrop for the Grange's role in securing legislative wins time and again.
Now that we've covered the history of the building, it's time to officially welcome you to your National Grange headquarters. First things being first, we'll walk into the building through the golden brass doors that were given to the Grange by Mr. and Mrs. Herschel Newsom, past master and first lady of the National Grange. Adjoining the lobby is the Goss Conference Room, named in memory of Albert S. Goss, National Master from 1941 to 1950. At one time, this room was actually 2 rooms, but a number of years ago, the wall was torn down and a temporary divider was placed in its stead, thus making it more convenient for larger organizations choosing to utilize the conference room for meetings. Adorning the walls of the Goss Conference Room are portraits of all of the National Masters since L.J. Tabor, who was master from 1924 to 1941. One of the advantages of having a permanent headquarters is having a place to do publishing within the organization. The basement is home to 2 printing presses that are still used to make publications like View from the Hill, a publication of the National Grange's Legislative Department. Having its own building also allows the National Grange to avoid costly off-site storage of hundreds of pieces of Grange merchandise, as well as thousands of historical records, ranging from subordinate Grange charters to journals of proceedings from past national conventions. Only the 10th and 11th floors are home to Grange office space, while the rest of the offices are rented out to other organizations. Some of these other groups include the International Center for Journalists on the 3rd and 5th floors, and the American Horse Council on the 7th floor. Besides Grange office space, the 10th floor is also home to the Saunders Library, named after founder and first master William Saunders. Grangers are always invited to research their rich history through the numerous volumes of Grange records kept here. Finally, the 11th floor is home to the Legislative and Communications departments, as well as what some might consider the crown jewel of a visit to this historic building, the office of the National Master, workplace of every master since Herschel Newsom upon the dedication of the building.
And that is your National Grange building. We hope you've enjoyed your visit, and would like to invite you to come meet the staff and tour the building in person. So if you are ever in Washington, D.C., be sure to stop by and see your National Grange building.